All right, guys, we just finished UFC Vegas 77, and we're going to go over most of the fights, but not all of the fights because they weren't all great, were they? But I do have to say that this is one of those cards where they were all pretty good, guys. Now, let's talk about this straight away because we went into this week, all of us, the shit talkers, talking about how boring and how much of an L this card was, how not fun it was going to be. Guys, did you enjoy yourselves as much as I did? Because this was a pretty good card. From the prelims all the way up to the main card, it was a pretty fun card. There was a lot of action through it. And for once, I feel like the ESPN deal didn't ruin the UFC here. Like, there wasn't much advertising. There wasn't a lot of downtime between the cards. They should start every single UFC event the same way that they start off their press conferences, about an hour and a half late, because it forces them to actually just pick it up and get it moving, and it was so enjoyable, guys. Let's jump right into the first fight that I wanted to talk about, Jack Della Maddalena versus some guy. Of course, I'm just joking. Bassil Hafez earned himself a name today. He belongs in the UFC. He is way more than just some guy to step in for Jack Della Maddalena. Everyone was coming into this fight. Well, it turns out that everyone who didn't know who Bassil was coming into this fight assuming that this was just going to be another easy win for Jack Della Maddalena, weren't they, guys? I mean, I certainly was. Again, I am very biased. He's an Aussie. He's amazing. Obviously, he's going to win. And then that first round had me shaking, had me like, oh my God, what is happening here? Like, Jack was getting, now we all saw it. We know that the wrestling, Jack was getting just not beaten up in the wrestling, but manhandled in the wrestling. And his idea to use a guillotine as a defense is like an okay idea if you're going to use that to open up the scrambles and get out of it. But he had decided that he was just going to stick to that. And very quickly, that first round was over and the fight was done. But there were moments in that first round where they were standing up and trading with each other. And that is usually where Jack Della Maddalena is putting people to sleep. But Bassil's chin was good, and Bassil was landing on Jack Della Maddalena as well, which was very worrying because Jack Della Maddalena, his head was snapping back, and we're like, okay, he's clearly losing on the ground here, but if it's on the feet, he might lose that too. Round two rolls along, Bassil's starting to look a little bit gassed. Jack Della Maddalena's starting to put hands on him again, and then JDM goes for a takedown, like drags him to the ground, and we were screaming, the fans were screaming, his coaches were screaming, everyone was screaming like, dude, there is a chance here that you have just thrown away the second round. Now, if you can be bothered to read the scoring of MMA, you will notice that it is damage-based scoring first. Unfortunately, Daniel Cormier hasn't decided to read those rules, and because he is such a biased ex-wrestler, he just assumes that wrestling immediately gets you the win. And I cannot believe, well, I can believe DC is so biased. DC was just saying that Bassil had won that second round. And the thing is, with the way that the judging goes, and, you know, apparently the judges don't bother to read the rules either sometimes, it's one of those rounds where it's like, oh my God, did Jack lose that round himself? Like, he clearly did more damage, but to engage on the ground like that and give Bassil the control time, suddenly we've set up this, like, what is going to happen in the third round? Third round rolls along. Bassil's chin is just shown off to be Vittori levels. You could hit that guy with a bus, he'd still be standing. You could tap him on the back of the shoulder, and as he turns around, just smack him with a brick across the jaw. Smack him with a brick across the jaw. Bassil will still be standing. It was so much fun to watch, guys. And then eventually we get to that decision. I'm not surprised that it's a split decision. I wouldn't even be surprised if there were some Bassil fans out there who were saying that was a straight up robbery. I know Justin Gaethje on Twitter is saying it was a robbery. It wasn't a robbery. It was a close fight. Ground control doesn't equal damage. Damage equals damage. But Bassil, welcome to the UFC. You lost, but you earned yourself a fan tonight, mate. Jack Della Maddalena usually is in there because of how smart of a fighter he is. And tonight, I think it was just a case of it's the back-to-back weight cuts. The entire Aussie team was partying last weekend. Izzy was partying last weekend. Volkanovski was partying last weekend. He's in that team environment of everyone as taken their foot off the pedal. He is fighting a week late. He's got a weight cut again, and I think it affected him inside the cage tonight because it wasn't Jack Della Maddalena's best night out. He got the W, but worrying going forward for Jack. I think he'll be all right going into his next fight as long as he has the proper lead up to it. Next fight that I wanted to talk about, guys, was Ottoman the Potato Smuggling Azaitar versus the Giga Chad, Francesco Pedro. Oh my God, what a name. It was a fun, competitive fight until goddamn Chris Tione, the referee, broke it up in what is my opinion, a little bit too early. Now, look, I do think that Pedro would have gone on to win that fight. He was in a winning position. In a way, I sort of get why Chris Tione had to do that. There was a lot of cuts on the face. There was a lot of blood. But just imagine this, guys. Ottoman Azaitar was still in that fight. He was giving the thumbs up. If he had managed to scramble out of that position, like let's say Pedro started to gas out a little bit and couldn't actually properly finish Ottoman, and Ottoman scrambles out of that position, and now he's standing up, he's covered in blood, and now we can get into a real back and forth fist fight. It would be one of those things that would just go down on Instagram, get the views, get the numbers. It would be such an insane fight to watch if we had gotten to see that happen. And we can't say 100% that wouldn't have happened. And now we don't know because these goddamn referees want to be so early and make sure none of these fighters get severely hurt, which I understand, but it's cage fighting and he wasn't out. He was getting beaten up. You've got to let him fight his way back into it. If he's throwing up thumbs up, he's still cognitively there, and you've got to back the fighters a little bit, yeah? As for Francesco Pedro, on the microphone, he's got a great personality on the mic. He's a good-looking young lad. He just got into the UFC. If he can start stringing together some wins like that, I think he will be a very fun prospect to come up and watch. He kind of reminds me of that Paulo Costa larrikindness. He's going to be fun with the memes once he learns to speak English. Really, really good to watch him coming up. Let's go to the next fight. Old Albert Duraev versus Jun Yong Park. I'm telling you, I was coming into this fight and I wanted Duraev to win. Not because of Duraev, not because of how much I love his personality, not because he's a Russian or anything like that, but because I wanted to see him win so we could put him up against Bo Nickel, so we could see how Bo Nickel was going to go against a Dagestani wrestler in the same weight class and who is still not in the rankings. So you get Bo Nickel a proper fight that he deserves and that we could learn something. Duraev had the quit in him tonight. He had it in him hard. You know, he could have won after that first round when Jun Yong Park gassed his arms out, trying to choke him out for about a minute and a half, yeah? But Jun Yong Park, good on him, really recovered well in the corner during that break between the first and the second round, came around and just beat the piss out of Duraev, like beat the life out of him. And Duraev just sort of gave up in front of us. He's a Dagestani. He didn't go for a single takedown, didn't try and engage in any wrestling, and just let himself sort of get beaten up and choked out. It was very, very disappointing for him. I loved Jun Yong Park's little dance that he did after that. He was like a drunk dad at the party. I could sort of see my future coming at me in that, even though he's of the same age. The dude's younger than me, but he looks old as fuck, you know what I'm saying, guys? But the personality on him was hilarious to see. The fact that he didn't gas himself up and kept coming out in the second and really just put it on Duraev, awesome to see. All that talk that I said in the last video, delete that one, guys. Never go back and watch that video again. I don't know what we're going to do with Bo Nickel now. That's a good one to leave down in the comments. Let's have a talk about that. Now that this Dagestani wrestler has sort of been taken out of the picture, like, Bo Nickel will beat him up. That's not fair to put him in there against Bo Nickel. What are we going to do with Bo Nickel? How are we going to set this next fight up so we can actually see something coming from Bo? I don't know, guys. Leave that down in the comments. Not what do you want to see next for Jun Yong Park. What do you want to see next for Bo Nickel? Next fight that I want to talk about, Terrance McKinney versus Naziadim Sukyakov. How am I going with the names today? Terrance McKinney, it was good to see him back. You know, I didn't know he was still fighting. I thought that he had retired and just become a full-time Twitter employee or Twitter worker or Twitter content creator. It's good to see that he was actually able to get some time in the gym after sending out about 100,000 tweets a day. Unfortunately, training for Twitter didn't really help with his fight. He pretty much gassed himself up in that first round where he was, you know, when he started his career, he was a kid who used to fight on the feet. After getting knocked out savagely and then going into a Twitter training camp, he decided that he was going to be a wrestler. And he became a wrestler with no cardio, and he got choked out in the second round. I will say, it's not entirely, for as much shit as I'm giving Terrance McKinney, not entirely his fault. Nazim Sujakov held onto the cage in the second round for about a full minute, and the referee just didn't seem to care, just completely ignored it. It really helped him get that finish. So to all the UFC fighters watching this video, I assume there's probably about 300 plus UFC fighters on the roster. They're all watching this video eagerly. Just cheat, guys. Just cheat. Just go for it. There is literally no reason not to. If you are caught blatantly cheating, which Nazim wasn't, but if you are caught blatantly cheating, the first thing you'll get is a warning. You won't even get a point deduction. So I would just go straight in and just start cheating straight away. Speaking of cheating the entire fight and just doing whatever you want, let's talk about it. Let's talk about Tucker Lutz versus Melsik Bagdasaryan. Wow, Bagdasaryan, what are you doing? I guess you're doing what people on YouTube have been saying to do. Just go ahead and cheat. Let's just run through the list of the things that Melsik did during this fight, guys. He punched Tucker Lutz in the dick. And then when Tucker Lutz was calling to put a break on the fight, he went for a head kick and tried to finish him there. In the second round, he clearly shoved his eyes into Tucker's face with a clawing motion and tried to rip his eyes out. And in the third round, he was grabbing onto the cage. He was aware of where the referee was and then grabbing onto the cage in the opposite position, trying to get himself back up onto the feet. None of them were accidental. They were all on purpose. He didn't lose a single point. Wow, what a guy. He might be, you know what? You are my new favorite UFC fighter. What the hell are you doing in there? And not only did you cheat throughout the entire fight, but you actually managed to edge it out, Melsik, and get the win as well. I feel so sorry for Tucker Lutz. He had a rough night in the office today, guys. And Melsik Bagdasaryan, I mean, just blatant cheating throughout the entire fight and gets the win. I don't like how, if you're a fan of Melsik Bagdasaryan, like, let me know down in the comments. Like, are you just a troll fan? Are you here for the chaos? Like, is the Joker your favorite character as well? Like, what is going on over there? And this was coming off the next fight down that I wanted to talk about, guys. Viktoriya Dudakova versus Istela Nunes. I could have vomited. I could have vomited. That was horrific. It was like a cartoon arm snap. That was just disgusting. You know, and the thing is, Viktoriya caused that with how much she was pushing through in that takedown. Of course, she wasn't doing that to intentionally break Nunes' arm, but she did do that. She pushed right through it and kept pushing. And when Nunes put her arm out like that and it caused that snap, the screaming, it was horrific. It was one of those ones where, like, you wish you weren't looking at the screen for it. I saw it like in slow motion during the replay because I was looking away and I heard the screaming first, and then I knew that something horrible had happened. And when it happened during the replay, I was like, oh man, I really wish that I didn't look at that. I hope she has a good recovery. I hope she can come back to fighting. I hope she gets full range of motion in the arm again. It's just one of those things. As for Dudakova, what can you say? You know, she won off the Contenders series with a broken leg. And now her first fight back, her opponent's gotten a broken arm. I'd just stay away from her. She's about as cursed as the 205 belt, don't you think? The next one was an interesting one. Costa versus Lingo. You might be wondering why I'm saying it was interesting, because the fight certainly wasn't, was it? But that's what made it so odd to me. Like, let's look at that first round again. Like, Costa put it on Lingo, and Lingo actually looked like soulless. He looked like there was nothing in him. And Costa was just beating him up free will like it was a sparring session, and Lingo was a heavy bag. And then as we get into the second round, his coaches are like yelling at him, trying to wake him up, yeah? And after the beating that Lingo was receiving, he slowly started to come alive. Like, instead of Costa beating Lingo to death, it was the opposite. It was Costa beating Lingo back to life. And then the third round was more of the same. Now, Lingo should absolutely be cut from the UFC because of a performance like that. And Costa should get a performance bonus for making his opponent look like that. What I found so interesting was the lack of effort and the lack of fight in Lingo during that fight. Someone needs to go check his bank account, his family's bank account, his training partner's bank account, his friend's bank account, because that to me reeks of a fight where Lingo told someone in his circle, put 25 grand on Costa and let's see what happens. It smelt rigged to me. You can't be that bad and that dead inside. I can understand having a lack of skill, right? Like we see this all the time, guys. This wasn't a lack of skill. And I can understand a fighter gassing out. We see that as well. They go in too hard. They start to breathe heavy. You see their guts inhaling and exhaling. You can see their movement become sloppy. There was none of that. There was just a fighter beating the crap out of another man who had the skills to stay in it and to not get himself killed, but didn't have anything else past that. It was one of those kind of losses where you had to try and lose that well. You know what I'm saying? And guys, the last fight that I wanted to talk about was Nam versus Maksum. Now, so many people were coming in high on Maksum. He's undefeated. I believe now that this card is over, he's going to be 17-0. Tyson Nam, 30 years old. People weren't really rating him as highly. Has sort of fought with this like smug look on his face, like sort of a Luke Rockhold-esque, like he believes he's already won the fight and he shouldn't even be bothered being in there. But he brought the fight to Maksum, really brought the fight to Maksum, and it made it very, very interesting. Because I actually gave the first round to Nam. He had some sort of knockdown wobbles with those inside leg kicks that he was doing. Maksum wasn't putting on any damage really. So to me, the damage went to Tyson Nam. And yeah, Maksum like went for that takedown towards the end of the fight, but Nam was able to throw it off. And I don't know how you guys watch fights and how you guys score fights when you're watching them. Let me know down in the comments. But to me, if you go for a takedown and your opponent blocks it and stops it with really well, with more skill, to me, that is worth more than a bit of wasted grappling up against the cage that you might get for 20 seconds after that failed takedown attempt. To me, having the skill to stop a takedown is worth more than attempting a takedown and completely failing it. And that is why like control time is so lowly scored, because you might have gone for a takedown, failed the takedown, and now you're just controlling up against the cage. To me, Nam wins that first round because he's scoring off the leg kicks that he did before that. Bit of a weird breakdown. I hope I explained that okay. But to me, that's why I gave Nam the first round. Then we get into the second round. Now, this one was clearly Maksum's round. Clearly. The damage, he kneed him a couple of times, wobbled him, good leg kicks. Like, this is where Maksum really started to wake up. And, you know, I think being such a young guy and such a highly touted prospect, he probably just needed the first round to find his range, find his power, get his cardio like up and going. And that's the round where he really started to come alive and look like that prospect that everyone was so excited about. Now, the third round, I had this one for Nam. And when we actually ended up getting to the judges' decision, it ended up being a Maksum fight. It turns out that the judges gave that first round to Maksum, which is fine. The first round was close. I understand the control time. I get that the judges don't understand the control time. And you have to accept that after watching these cards every single week, that the judges are going to score control time more than they actually should be scored in the written down rules of MMA. So that's all good. But now going forward, we're going to see Maksum come up and people are going to be saying, oh, he's this 17-0 undefeated prospect. Guys, this is an underdog maker waiting to happen. If you're one of those people that love to bet going into the fights and like you watch the fights because you love to gamble and throw around the cash, and you like to gamble and see if you can work out who's going to win and start putting down hard money on it, Maksum, having won this fight and going forward as 17-0, if he gets paired up with the right fighter in the next fight or the fight after that one, he has real holes in his game. Nam was better on the feet, in my opinion. Nam was able to get out of the grappling. This 17-0 prospect isn't going to be what the UFC are going to hype him up to be. Like, guys, we know how the UFC is going to hype him up going into the next few fights. So I'd be watching the underdog odds as we go into this. It's one of those careers to watch where it's like, oh, okay, now we know. Now we know there's a little money maker here if that's the way that you want to start playing the cards going forward. All right, guys, that was it. That were my thoughts for UFC Vegas 77. Let me know down in the comments. What do you think is next for JDM? How do you think he went when he should have been such a favorite? And about Bassil, how do you think he should be stacked up next in the UFC after doing so well against a prospect like JDM? Guys, if you've been enjoying these videos, maybe consider subscribing, and I will see you all in the next one.